Okay, then we're going to move on to the undertones of the limbs. So we're going to take our paint and then we're going to dab on a bit of a little line just on the bottom of the foot where it's the thinnest part. And then we're going to sponge that in and blend it and make it disappear. Well, not disappear, but you know, sink. And then we're going to move on to the crook of her foot, of her little ankle. There's a little bit of a blue spot on most ankles right here where the skin is thin and you can see the blood vessels topically through the skin. It makes it kind of a blue undertone right there. On the outside of her foot, again, and then behind the knee. Okay, so there's that one. She's little, so she goes a little fast. And then we'll do the other foot, catch it up. And again behind the knee. Alright, now we'll move on to her hands. I'm going to put a little bit in the palm of her hand and bring it up to her wrist area. And then I'm going to do a kind of a stripe across the inside of her under fingers where the skin is a little more thin down here. Just kind of blends in and sinks. You don't want it to be very visible, otherwise it will look like you messed up. And we're going to turn it over. And then we're going to take a little bit of the blue and put it across the backs of the fingers. Again, you don't want this to be super, super blue or it looks like your baby's needing some oxygen. And then we put some in the little elbow crotch. That's it for hand number 1. Hand number 2. Genesis heat set paints have to be set in an oven in order to retain the paint, otherwise they will wipe off your baby. I have a special oven set up. I actually have 2 of them because I make enough babies that one is not enough. So I have them on different circuits so they don't blow the circuit breaker every time I use it. I'll move on to Tolliver. They have to be cooked. In my oven, it's calibrated to 250 degrees for 12 minutes. And that will set the paints so that they doesn't come off when you wipe at it. Some ovens is different. I use a convection oven. A lot of people like to use New Waves, but I've never had any luck in them, and the only disasters I've ever faced was using a New Wave oven. It was not a pretty sight, and it was an expensive kit, so I refuse, on moral principle, to not destroy any more kits by using an oven that I don't understand. Crossed his little nose. This ornery little guy just makes me happy, his little cheesy grin. A little bit on the bottoms of each nose. He's even got 2 little teeth in there, so we'll get to paint some teeth a little later. And then his deeper parts of the ears, just like on Tully. You don't really see this on this first layer because it's the only thing there, but when you put the next layers of paint on top, it really starts to show in the color transformations. You can see the depth of it building, and that's what we're after, is to make it look like it's multiple layers, that there's depth to it and it's not just kind of slopped on. I'm going to switch to a smaller brush for this one just because the bigger ones are complicated to control when it comes to these tiny features. So a little bit in the hand, up the wrist, across the little wrist area. Across the under parts of the fingers. Across the backs of the fingers. And then the little arm crotch. The whole rest of the doll is set up based off these undertones. It makes the doll go from kind of a plain, flat, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not as realistic. These blue undertones and the veinings that we'll do next create a really, really intense sense of depth that really fools the eye to thinking that there is blood beneath the veins, and making these guys look even more realistic. Even though they're just vinyl, it will create a look that makes people think that they're alive and breathing and happy and healthy. And that's kind of the goal. That's what we're after. The more real they are, the more desirable they are to have around. Okay, so that's it for Tully and Tolliver. Now as far as Sheldon goes, I am going to give him a little bit of blue undertones too, just because I would like to create the depth. But before I do that, I think I might have to increase my camera so that it zooms out a little more. Let's see if I can do that without botching up the whole thing. 30 seconds. Alright, that'll do it. Alright, does that work? Alright, what can we see here? Alright, so snails are cold-blooded creatures. There's not blood rushing through their veins like there is on any warm-bodied person. But we still would like the depth on this guy. And so I'm going to create the depth in the biggest creases, and that would be around the shell, where I would guess the most growth on a snail comes from these creases, whereas it expands. So I'm going to use the same blue, just because I've never done this before. He's the first one, so I'm experimenting. So if it sucks, then forgive me, but this is what my brain is thinking is possible, so this is what we're going to go with. I'm going to put the same blue in these creases, just a little ways at a time, so I have a chance to blend it properly before it really sinks in. This just creates a shading to make it look like that parts of the shell is thinner and more vulnerable than the outside of the shell where it's the hardest. I'm going to do a traditional looking shell for him that's kind of a red with some iridescent mother of pearl type colors blended in with it. So that's the creases on that side of the shell that we're going to highlight. I think I'm going to do a little bit up here where the flange is, where it flares out to meet the body. And on the back side, we're going to do it in that deepest spot and more intense. Since there's not a lot of crease there, we're just going to kind of do a bullet point and blend it out a little bit. And then on the back side of the shell where it meets. Alright, and as far as his face goes, I think I might put some maybe in his smile deep down to add some depth there. And then I think I'll put some around his little flares on his snail body part. No idea what the names of these things are. Little frilly, swelly things. Sheldon is kind of unique. I sculpted him in one piece, so there's no joints, there's nothing. He's just one piece, and he has a hole in his center. So if you want to weigh him, you can stick your glass beads or whatever inside of him, and then you'll glue a piece of felt or something over the hole to prevent it from falling out. That'll keep him weighted. He's pretty hefty for what he is, though. I think he'll be able to stay pretty sturdy on his feet. So I'm going to finish up doing his little flary flanges things. This kind of creates a really thin looking layer of flangey bits, and that's kind of cool looking to me. I think it looks more realistic right there where it's nice and thin and trying to move along the ground. I'm going to put a little bit at the crease where the snail shell meets the little body. Across where the rest of the snail shell meets the body. And follow that around to the back. And then on this side we're going to, again, catch it where the shell meets the body. I don't know if you can see on here, but I gave Sheldon two little, I guess, beauty marks in the shape of a heart. There's one on this side, and there's a smaller one on this side, where it looks like the shape of a little heart in the print of all of his little textures. Alright. That's it for our blue undertones. I'll start the veins now. We'll start back with Tully and Tolliver. I think I'll shrink the camera back down with these guys so you can really see the veins going on. Okay, so for this one we're going to use the tiny brush again. And the blending brush. So for this paint, I'm going to use the lid of the jar. So we're going to put some of the wet from the jar. Okay. Trying to figure out my placement. It seems like I'm doing this backwards, like looking in a mirror. It's weird. Okay, so I'm going to stick some of this wet paint onto the lid so that I have a little more dry area to pull from, so I'm not constantly dipping into straight wet paint. So this is what we're going to go with, this color over here. It's a little thicker, but that's okay. It needs to be a little bit thicker to stay visible after we blend it in. So we'll move the paints and then the head. Alright, so with the tiny little brush, I start from behind the ears and just very gently make little tiny veins. You don't want straight lines, you don't want tree branches. So that's the first side. It's kind of dark, so we're going to take our little brush in and you're going to gently tap it, not smear it or paint it like you would a normal painting, but you just want to tap it. That takes the darkest parts off the top layers and helps to sink the paint to be a background area to make it look like it's below the skin. You don't want to do too much at a time or your paint will dry and it'll look like a Sharpie was scribbled on the head. Alright, so that's the first area. We're going to do that with the other temple. Again, we're going to very gently tap it to sink those colors down to the lower layers. You don't want it too dark or it's going to kind of ruin the effect of your baby. It'll look like kind of zombified and creepish. So just a gentle, subtle vein below the skin surface. I'm going to put a couple of drops of the thinner straight into this so I don't have to pull any more paint onto it, but it dries fast when it's on the lid. Okay, so now we're going to go for the veins between the eyes. We're going to pull one down from up in the head somewhere. I don't know if you can see that very well on the camera, but it's not as dark as the ones on the side, and I don't want it to be because she's supposed to be a little older looking. But we still want it to be there, to be caught in various lightings. Alright, so she has her side ones, she has her front ones, and now we're going to flip her around, and we're going to carry on these veins up into the hairline so that they don't just appear on one spot and then disappear somewhere else. Gently tap them down to blend them in and make it so they're not sharp-edged lines, but more blurry and sunken looking. Alright, we're going to follow this